in the specification on goal setting. So you don't really have to take it down, you can just listen. You can always look at the specification later. The fifth is eliminating possibilities that are not consistent with the larger purpose or aim, and then choosing the best among the remaining alternatives. Eliminating possibilities that are not consistent with the larger purpose, and then selecting the best. Now, what will be best will depend on you as a unique individual with your own imminent view of the future in your own particular environmental interactions. Then the next thing you would do, the sixth step, might be determining the feasibility of a particular goal. How feasible is it now that you've selected it as the best possibility? How feasible is it? And you assess this by assessing its prerequisites. What do you have to do to get ready to be able to do that? The seventh would be to establish sub-goals. What are all the little steps you have to do to achieve that possibility? And you integrate them into a coherent pattern. This might mean temporally organize them. What will I do first? What will I do second? What will I do third? Or it might be that you conceptually organize it in the sense that in order to be able to take this workshop on philosophical foundations of education, I really better know something about what philosophy is. The eighth step would be committing oneself to the goal and a specific plan of action. And that means that you have to assign some priorities to it and not do other things which conflict with it or would undermine it. The ninth would be coordinating the goal with all the other goals you have to do. This goal has to do with being able to get all the report cards done, or the reports that have to be turned into parents about the child's developing competency in the classroom. Now, how do I balance that off with the fact that I'm supposed to leave in 2 days to go to a workshop? Now, how am I going to get that done? So you have to balance off that goal with all the other things that you have ongoing. And then the last step, the 10th and probably most important, is to initiate some course of action so that you can accomplish it, or try to accomplish it. So what becomes clear in all of this is that throughout any goal-setting process, you have to keep in mind not just a specific goal, but how it relates to your ultimate aims, what you want to do with your life, what you want to do as a professional, what you want to do as a human being, all of these things. You have to keep that clearly in mind. Goals become all important. And if we want to talk about some of the educational implications for some of these things, how would we begin attending to it? You could set up learning experiences to help children become very competent in going through the whole goal-setting process, not globally. Okay, children, decide what you're going to do now. Instead, take it piece by piece, like every one of these 10 things, and have children work on it to develop competence in doing all of those things, which means you encourage fantasy when it's appropriate, and always help children to differentiate fantasy from reality. Because sometimes children come to think that they can create reality by fantasizing enough, and so have their little pets that sit by the chair, and you have to be very careful not to step on them. One of the things, implications for education, is that we should try, in working with young children, or even with children with learning disabilities, to make the goals very definitely related to their developmental level. They should be specific. They should help them. In other words, they should not say, well, I want to be a good reader. If that truly is how they feel, that's more of an ideal. Now you have to help them to work out specific goals that they could work toward to be able to do that well, you might help them to learn to differentiate the sub-goals in that process, which might mean I have to learn all the sounds of the two-syllable, the prefixes and suffixes or something. I have to know what they say or what they mean and those kinds of things. So, you have to help children get them down to specifics.
Linda, when you were talking about success and failure, were you equating or negative feedback? Could you equate failure with negative feedback?
Failure
in general, could you equate failure with negative feedback?
See, I don't see.
And the reason I'm asking is because every question is, how do you prepare if a child never has a chance to experience failure or negative feedback? How do you prepare him to deal with that if it should come up? Maybe it's just indirect.
I find it hard to see how someone might never have encountered failure. There are some children, however, who always consistently set their goals very, very low so that they will be sure and be able to achieve it. As a result, they don't feel very much investment in it. So the research shows that these kids don't, they have such a strong fear of failure that what they do is they set their goals really low so that they can succeed. And so as a result, things that they set for themselves, they might not. But it's hard for me to believe that children, in everything that they do, that they would always succeed. Now, a child can succeed at a task. He might be making definite, what I mean by success is making some progress in the sense that he is obviously more proficient or more competent than he was before doing a similar kind of task in some small way. It doesn't have to be something huge, and yet that might not be satisfying to the teacher, to the parent, or whatever. It's not a recognition that there has been movement toward a higher level of integration. There's a recognition on the part of the teacher or the parent or even the kid that he hasn't moved enough, and therefore it constitutes a negative kind of feedback. You are still not getting the OU sound. Ow. Why don't you know that? I mean, we've gone over it so many times. Instead of being able to see that the child is making progress toward beginning to form that integration. I think one of our problems is that children are doing well and they are progressing. They're going at a slower rate, but our goal is not their goal. In the sense, sometimes we have set an expectation that is too high, and so we consider it a failure, give the child negative feedback when in effect he has been moving up. There are times when children haven't been. Maybe it's not their goal, maybe they're incapable, maybe they don't want to, and we come down on them very hard. But there are times when it's legitimate, and not saying that you're not doing well, but merely that it didn't work, did it? We put the red and the yellow together and we didn't get orange, did we? Or you didn't get orange. Let's look at why we didn't get orange, or why you didn't get orange. That is a kind of negative feedback. It didn't work, you didn't get orange. He knows it perceptually. He got this red color, but it isn't orange, or not what he thought was orange. So that's a kind of feedback, and then you give him feedback, which is not negative, but merely is a cue to him that it didn't work, and let's find out why it didn't work.
I think maybe another way of looking at Barbara's saying. If you take a parent or a teacher, let's take a parent, who observes the behavior and accepts the behavior that the youngster is presenting, what is, and simply accepts everything that the child presents. Okay. As compared to the parent who is always pointing out what the child is doing and what the child should be doing or ought to be doing. What you get in that situation is a youngster with a great deal of confidence, but no confidence. I think what Barbara was talking about is the parent who accepts essentially everything that the youngster does, and they get a lot of confidence, but no confidence. And these are the ones that usually end up with very short-term goals that are rather impulsive, avoidance of pain and seeking of immediate pleasure. And that's a very different ballgame that we're playing here. We have neurotics where our problem is to get monkeys off their back, to make them lessen their goals, and the other is really have them set some long-term goals.
Yeah.
And these are, I think, the two classifications
That's a
of kids
good
that we
point.
have here.
That's very good. I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at or whether I was getting at what you were getting at either, but it's a good point.
I'm not sure what I was getting at. Going further confusion.
There's a lot of research. There's a lot of research out there in terms of level of aspiration. I want a break when I finish Will. It's going to be my will. It's my goal. No, because I want us to go into small group activity, so I will move along, but I do want to just cite where we can find some more information on this. There's a lot of research done on level of aspiration, and it has to do with my aspirations for the kid, the adult, to the child, and then the child's for the child. And they talk a great deal, it's approached in an extrinsic way. But the truth of the matter is that you have to do a little of both. In the sense, you've got to help a child to stretch his limits, as George was saying, that you don't want to always accept everything he does. You want him to expect greater and greater things of himself all the time. Otherwise, you've got a kid walking in who thinks he knows everything and doesn't. You know, it's not reality-based. And there are ways to handle that, which I'd like to talk with you about that. And the other is that it's the child who is constantly being pushed up faster and faster and has great anxieties about not producing and great fears about failing and being threatened and everything else. Do you want to say anything?
That answers my question more than anything else so far, what you just said.
Okay. Talk to me after on the break. Okay. I think one of the things that's important is helping the child to really think it through very carefully and go through all those steps and learn how to use the process so that he doesn't lose track of what he's after and what he's doing, and so that he's then able to evaluate the outcome of his actions. Did I achieve the goal? But that's not as important as knowing what went wrong. How did it go wrong? I didn't get to the goal. What happened? To be able to then look back and say, maybe what happened was I used the wrong mode of action. Maybe I should use another way. I'm reminded of the glass wall. And there's a monkey over here, and on the other side is a banana. Well, the monkey would come running up to the wall and try to jump over it and couldn't because it was too high. Kept doing that, kept doing that, kept doing that. What we have to do is to help children not to repeat what didn't work, but to then back up, look at their possibilities, and select another form of action, which might mean that it's longer to go around the glass wall, but if you go around the glass wall, you can get the banana. That may be the differentiator between man and monkeys. We understand how to go around. Monkeys do too, I must say, to some extent. They can do some what's called problem solving. So vague aspirations are fine, but if you're going to guide your course of action or your behavior, you want to bring it into clear focus and to clearly articulate steps in the process and to be able to act on it. Okay, I'm going to go rather quickly because I want to get to Will. Will. The process... My will. The process of realizing a goal or intention through action, and it's manifested in 3 phases. This is pretty straightforward. You're probably all familiar with this. It's the self-initiation of activity. It's the perseverance to maintain efforts over a long period or with obstacles toward fulfillment. And then it's the effectiveness of closure, bringing a task to conclusion. What I'm going to do is take each one of those and say one sentence about it. I know that all of you work with this quite a bit, and it's probably sounding very familiar to you. It would be wonderful if you would take each one of these specifications and go through it and really begin to see how some of these things could be directly approached in a learning situation with kids, and even can be used when you're doing a diagnostic workup on kids. Because if you don't have their attention, or if their goal is not the goal of the person who is trying to do the workup on them, you're going to get a very bizarre profile of this child. Okay, self-arousal. That's just getting ready to do something. You know you're going to do something. You're just getting yourself set from a state of rest to a state of action. You know you're going to be making that move. It involves attention, and it involves fantasy, or thinking about what you have to do. There's a famous little story about William James, who was thinking about getting out of bed one freezing morning, and he couldn't get up. And his inability to get up was related to two conflicting tendencies. The first was, bed was very warm, he wanted to stay there. And the other was, he started to think about all the things he had to do that day and didn't want to do. So he just simply couldn't get himself going. But when he began to think about what would happen, the consequences, this is all fantasizing, and that if he didn't do it, he'd then have to do it later, or things would be in a worse pickle, he got up. So you get set for action, and you get set for action by thinking about your goal and what it is that you have to do, and lots of other things. Perseverance. Whether you will be able to maintain your activity or your direction toward whatever it is you want, despite all obstacles, will depend on your commitment to the goal. It will depend on the kind of task you have to do and on the kind of obstacles. It's very hard to drive your car across a bridge that's collapsed. And no matter how much you want to do it, no matter how much your goal is, the obstacles sometimes are insurmountable. That's not to say that you can't go back to the nearest town and go around and finally get to the other side of the ravine. But you have to do some rethinking. Sometimes you have to abandon a particular kind of action that's related to the goal and not abandon the goal, and sometimes you have to abandon the goal. Let's take an extreme example. If you're going to visit a friend and you planned it all out, and then the friend dies. That actually happened to us once. It was very distressing. And, you have to handle that with giving up goals and what that means and all the affect associated with it. And sometimes it's very difficult to give up a goal. But sometimes that's reality, too, that you must. Okay. There are some factors which affect perseverance. One of these is your expectancy of success, especially children who are having to just simply learn the sounds associated with the letters as in reading. And it's a very hard thing to get down for the child. He's ready, but it's tiresome. He has a short attention span. But somehow, if he has a vision of what success will mean for him, that he will then be able to get into all those picture books that his brother sits down for hours and doesn't move, sits there with a smile on his face, turning his pages, and he will also be able to partake of that. Sometimes if he has a vision of that sort of thing, or even more concrete things, that he can keep himself going a little longer on learning the sounds associated with letters. So expectancy of success is important. The degree of control an individual believes he has over that set of circumstances. Does he want to do what he's there to do? Is that really an important goal of his? Or is that something that a teacher sat him down and said, now you will do this? So it's important as an educator then to build the child's confidence in being able to choose a course of action and get himself going on it, perform it, and complete it. Fantasy is important in planning that all out. We talked about goal setting. That's involved in carrying out the action. Of course, you'd have to set your goals first, and then you would go about doing it. You have to provide experiences or the environment in which a child can reach his goal. He sets a goal for himself, and there's absolutely nothing in the environment for which he can interact so he can achieve it. He's not going to be able to do it. Affecting closure. There are lots of kids who never finish a task. They start 5 million things during the day and they never finish any. Some of it may be because the child is hyperactive and he has an inability to sit still long enough or to attend. But there are often other kinds of reasons because the child simply has not learned the beauty of finishing the task. He's not done it to see how good it feels to do. That anything that we can do to help children to learn to complete their task so that then they get this crucial feedback on the goal and on their competence and on everything else. Anything that we can do to help develop that competence is really crucial. They do lots of things to determine whether children can do it, some of which are very mean. They keep interrupting children to see if they will go back and do their task. This is what experimenters do. I'm not going to go into all of that. We are out of time, so I'm just going to summarize. And then I'll talk about what the small group task will be and about break and stuff like that. Volition has been overlooked in the scientific study of human behavior. But for the ANISA model, we give it a crucial role. Volition is the capacity to form ultimate aims, which are translated into operable goals and intentions, and are expressed in some form of action. There are the three main processes of volition are attention, goal setting, and will, and each are progressively more actualized expressions of purpose. For goal setting, you need attention. For will, you need to have set your goals and outlined a course of action. Man is a purposive being, and his sense of purpose is the primary element which enables him to shape his own future. When one attends to a possibility as opposed to something which is actual, one is fantasizing. And fantasy is a mode of attention in which the data are potential rather than actual. If a child can fantasize, he can make movements later on in action where he's already worked out some of the potential dangers. He's already thought through things that he can make mistakes on. And so in a sense, fantasy will protect him. We should recognize its role. It's really a good way to protect children to work things through. The cumulative tradition of actualized potentialities, whatever you've got inside you, constitutes your immanence. And that is your basis of personal identity as of this moment. And it explains the means by which the past participates in the creation of the present and transmits itself into the future. It's that whole transcendence thing I talked about many times earlier today. The ability to move forward rests on the child's ability to or the adult's ability to transcend the present. Purpose and will, including goal setting and attention. The basis of this transcendence represents at once the fulfillment of the present by going beyond it, and in essence, that is the creative advance into novelty. Now, what we're going to do on break is break up into small groups. What I'd like you to do is take till 1/4 for your snack. Then take your snack with you to your group and work in your group. Is your goal becoming my goal? Till 25 up. Then we'll come back here and we'll have interaction about what the group worked on. I know it doesn't give us a whole lot of time. We'll have to be very competent in really finishing our snack at 1/4, coming back, going into your groups and finishing by 25 up, and then we will interact. Now, if you would please start counting off through 6. We'll go all the way across the front row, and then this way, and then this way, and that way, and that way.
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
6,
1, 2,
3,
4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3,
4, 6, 1,
2.
3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2.
Okay, great. Now, groups 1 through 4, if you will stop right here, Paul will hand you something. Groups 5 and 6, anyone with a 5 or a 6, meet me over here, and I will give you something. And it's your task. And
Where are they going to meet? In this across the
you can use both the rooms over there and back in here.
I think it's pretty straightforward. Anyone who has...
Do we have a reporter?
You could do it there or come on up here, but you should stand up.
I could do it here just fine.
All right.
I can sum it up by saying we failed to achieve effectiveness of closure.
Oh, yes, the group 5, 4, and 5.
Sorry, okay.
Go ahead.
Charge. As a group, list as many ways as you can think of or have time for that volitional incompetencies in real goal-setting attention interfere with developing competencies in any or all of the processes in the psychological potentiality assigned to their group. And to our group was assigned psychomotor competence.
Did everybody understand that? I was trying to get after here. No, it's probably very confusing. I got waylaid by one group, so 2 groups didn't get to hear the explanation, and I apologize. But the idea was to sense the intertwining of all the different competencies, and especially how volition affects the development of the other. Volitional competence affects the development of other competencies, but specifically to turn around and look at it the other way, which is what your major concern is, how incompetencies, how lack of development or whatever can affect the growth of another competence area. So number 1.
We spent a lot of time talking about George's dancing.
We decided that he shouldn't.
But he just didn't set goals for himself.
This group, it was interesting, saw so many connections that they couldn't get started, in a sense. They felt that, correct me if I'm not perceiving it correctly, they felt that if a child couldn't set goals or anything like that, of course it affected all the other competencies. And it was difficult to be specific. Am I right? Okay. Next, 2.
Perceptual competency was what our group discussed, and we were one group you didn't come and explain to us. But we did feel that it was kind of a building block, and if you didn't have attention, you really couldn't have the other 2. We felt you would not retain the task, and you couldn't differentiate the activity. That would be for attention, for goal setting. You wouldn't practice and will. You wanted to do something else, or you started it and wouldn't finish it, and you didn't have any stick-to-itiveness. I don't know if we're on the right.
That's fine, but it's also applied to any
Right, that's
any
what we
psychological
found.
potentiality. I can see where it's difficult to be specific. All right. Group 3.
Our group dealt with cognitive competency and in really trying to understand what the question was, we started feeling that whatever we came up with was going to deal with all of the competencies, that this was something that was basic to all of them, that it was a foundation for learning, and one step leads to another. But we did come up with a very impressive list.
And by the way, she says, we want to hear it.
Oh, good. Deprived environment, poor nutrition, limited intelligence, peer pressure.
What leads to those things?
I beg your pardon?
What volitional incompetence? How does volitional incompetence engender those things?
We felt that all of these things led to
Volitional incompetence. Okay. You turned it around. Okay. That's all right.
That's with the way we thought the questions.
Go ahead. You started that way, too.
Shall I still go ahead with?
Yes, I want to hear it now.
backwards approach?
These things lead to relational competence.
Did I say peer pressure, poor self-concept, negative past experience, perception, sensory deprivation, lack of psychomotor development, developmental lag, limited educational experience background, and flat feet.
How come you don't have acne or warts in there? It's too bad you left those out. There is no direction. I suppose the way the words come out, that implies a direction that volitional competence has to give rise to these other incompetencies, give rise to incompetencies in other areas. But it's intertwined and there is no direction intended. That it doesn't matter where you start, it's how these things interact with one another. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4? Was that 4? 3, 4? 4 went home.
We've changed captainship here. We went around.
Personship.
We went around and about like many groups did. We thought we kept going back to this idea of coming up with a list of things that would result in volitional incompetency, and it was hard for us to take it from that point and go back, especially with the affective area. We came up with a parallel. It's not a complete black and white parallel, but what seemed to make sense to us is this. The evaluative processes seem to line up with the attention of the will. In other words, you couldn't go on if you weren't first focusing
Attention of the purpose? Focusing purpose?
the attention under the category of volitional competency. In other words, first you'd have to be able to say, this is what I feel. You have to be able to acknowledge it before you could do anything about it. And that seemed to line up with the first 3 processes under volitional. The next area, goal setting, seemed to line up with the regulative processes.
That's interesting.
And the
Oh, it's just a different way of
will,
looking at it.
which is a further degree, a more complicated degree, seemed to line up with the empathetic processes. And the other areas, the other thing that we were able to draw parallel with was differentiate. We could parallel with evaluative, integrate, we paralleled with regulative, and generalize, we paralleled with empathetic. Not that they're-
Empathic, yeah.
Whatever.
It's all right.
Not that they're all, I'm going to crisscrossing all the time, but we had to be able to come up with a structure
Yeah.
for us to deal with messages.
That's very interesting, because I have not really thought of it that way, but it's possible to draw parallels among many of those things.
right.
But I would like to just... You speak right. When you talk about attention lining up with the evaluative, attention might be your focus, but when you actually begin to evaluate, like answer the question, how am I? Then it's a cognitive act, but you're actually doing something. You're not just focusing now on something. You're focusing on internal material. You're attending. You have to attend. But you're also beginning to make a step toward what you're going to do with it. Now, regulative means you are doing something. You're managing, you're coping, you're doing something. Let's see where we are.
I think it was easier for us to deal with those
Facilitating.
words.
That's doing something. You know what I mean? It's not just attention now. You're moving into
Right, goal setting.
some
But that was
sort.
too much to deal with at once for us in a group.
I think the thing to do is to say that you're on the right track in the sense that taking these 3 processes and applying them here is something that you have to do for each one of the other areas also. And to say that I need to go through each one of those 3 phases for each attending, setting goals, willing myself to do something about it, forming some kind of action response. Now, I've learned something from this in the sense that I had a different intent. What I hoped to come out with was something totally different than what you came up with, which was a good, what you came up with was good too. It's just a completely different way of going at something. You followed the directions and you did something and you found that it didn't seem to fit. Like, how could you be specific? And I think the most impressive thing out of all of this is that you see how you can't talk about one without talking about the other. If you say it's true of volition, in terms of the incompetencies interfering with growth and development of perceptual competence, you're going to have to say it's true of psychomotor and of cognitive and of affective. That the thing is just pervasive, and so you found yourself having to be general. And that's the way you find the human being, with everything intertwined in him. And I think you're struggling with that, and I struggle with it all the time when I try to use words to articulate a specific competence, and try not to get it confused with how it's so intertwined and so bound up with each other. Like, how can you talk about learning language without talking about everything else? Or how can you talk about conservation without talking about perception, which is you have to work with materials to be able to begin to conserve, and you have to be able to have a good relationship with your teacher, have an affective feeling that they're after your own developing competence and that kind of thing. So that it is all wound up with each other. We do talk about it separately just to explicate. We pull out this and call it psychomotor and talk about it by itself, but it really isn't found by itself. It's found embedded in the child as part of everything. What I was getting after, and what I thought would be so helpful for all of us, is if we could generate ways in which we saw volitional competence being related to, say, perceptual competence or psychomotor competence or cognitive competence. Some of the examples I gave you, I was saying that in terms of affective, that if we didn't use our sense of purpose to organize the negative emotions around those things that we should avoid and the positive emotions about those things which enhance our viability, then we were in trouble. And that's why volition is so important for the development of affectivity. Do you understand what I'm getting at? That's the kind of thing I thought would be so nice and simple, and you would see all these examples, and it didn't quite work out like that, did it? So this was not such an explicative exercise for any of us, but I think one of the things that has come out of it is a feeling that all of these things apply to all of them, all other areas, so that volition invades all of the other developing competencies, and that you can't talk about one without being concerned about purpose and will and all those other things. Yeah.
I think the recognition of that fact is why all of us had so much trouble.
Maybe, but it's probably other things too. Sorry. Okay, group 4. 5. Can you read your task out, because 1 through 4 didn't hear it.
Tommy is having trouble attending during math period. It is a 40-minute period and he can only attend for 6 minutes. The educational goal is to increase Tommy's on-task time in math. Your group task is to identify as many ways that you can think of, keeping a list, to assist Tommy in persevering toward attainment of the goal. Focus on how you would arrange the environment and guide Tommy's interactions with that environment. First of all, we thought we'd have to look at biological aspects before we did anything, nutrition, check hearing, vision, etc. Look at the physical environment, maybe who needs isolation. Look at the human environment. Maybe there's someone next to him that just bugs him so much that he can't attend to the task. Then possibly break down the tasks, say 6 6-minute tasks during the 40-minute period. Maybe counseling would be needed. Maybe he's not attending because he's overwhelmed in other areas. Goal setting around the on-task. When I was looking at it, it had goal setting as a separate part, but
It was more than one process, right?
yeah, okay. Maybe explaining the purpose of math by using concrete experiences take Tommy shopping, etc. Foster feeling of self-worth through peer teaching. Maybe Tommy could instruct others in a math area that he was competent in. Chart progress, use reward systems, contracts, maybe using free time games and puzzles involving math.
I liked the way you separated it down into physical environment and human environment and those kinds of things. Could have generated probably some things for the unknown environment too, all of which are pieces of the self-environment depending on how they're embodied in your immanence. That was very good. You have to be very careful in terms of the reward system that you think about, that we keep in mind that what we want to develop is the child's intrinsic will to do things and to help him to learn that. And so these rewards would be things like things that he would find enhancing to self.
Joss was addressing that.
Well, I discussed that what I see in our 3R classes is a hierarchy of rewards, starting at concrete and proceeding to more abstract, and also that if you accept Glasser, that he says the ultimate reward is to be a normal human member of your environment, and it certainly seems to work that way.
Coming?
That's
George.
back to our volitional incompetence. That's one of the big issues that we have in our 3R model, which is based upon the learning theory, where the locus of control is external, where we then set up a series of short-term goals, which we then extrinsically reward, putting the locus of control outside. The big difference, and I think that's what you were talking about from the reactive model of physics, which is what the Skinnerian approach is. And this approach is so different because you start with the assumption that the youngster has subjective aim and he has the ability to goal set, which is more congenial to where Glasser, where we are with Glasser. But when in this model, you start with that in terms of how you relate to the subject. You do not relate to the subject as an object. You assume his subjective aim and you start there in the ranging environments, and then you may reward his initiative, his will, and reward that, not the task. But it's a very, very different approach from what we have been doing, and we need to spend some more time on rethinking our model, and this is key to it.
And to be more explicit about it. Yeah. But I have a sense that that's what you were talking about anyway, and not all I was doing is trying to call attention to the fact that we shouldn't construe it as that we're setting up things and we're shaping the child to our way of being. Last group. 30 seconds. No. No, take as long as you need.
No, I'll stop. 25. Okay, the question. You have a child in your class who's nice looking. Everything he says indicates he wants his peers to play with him. He is 6 years old. The child's goal is to gain peer acceptance, but all his behaviors drive other children away. He has difficulty sharing, won't cooperate, yells at children, thumps others, and etc. In group tasks, list all the ways you have time for, and you can arrange an environment and guide the child's interactions with the environment so he can develop skills that will help him to achieve his goal of peer acceptance. Okay, number one, I had a hard time figuring out if it really was a child's goal to do this, or if the kid thought it was a teacher's goal. Because all the behaviors that the kid does indicates there's a problem. He doesn't really want to interact. So it's possible it is a child's goal, but it's also possible the kid thinks that this should be his goal because the teacher wants it for him. So I was a little fuzzy on that issue.
Okay, that wasn't my intent, but it's fine for you to have read it that way.
That's what the behaviors indicated to me, though. Okay?
Sometimes children want things but don't know how to go about it. But it doesn't matter how you interpret it as long as you respond on that basis. So.
Okay, somebody said you medicate the hell out of the kid. Okay, several options that I think are somewhat viable. Talk to other students on the slide to try to get them to understand the student's problem and to deal with it more effectively. Another thing is peer tutoring on a one-to-one basis. I think peer tutoring is one of the most successful things you can do if you have children who are at that level and can deal with it. So have a student who can sit down and work with this particular student, or vice versa, have a problem student working with another student to try to gain some kind of camaraderie and positive rapport with each other. Plan an activity that this student is good at so he can be like in charge, so other students can like look up to him and say, hey, he's not all that bad. I respect him for these issues. Reinforces positive involvement. If you're talking about something like a powwow or a group discussion, I'm not really that familiar with 6-year-old kids, and somebody in the group said probably can't do it, but I'm going to throw it out for the class to give me some feedback. If you could sit down and talk to people in the class and say, this is John's problem, what do you think you can do to help him? Or even throw it out to him. I don't know if you can do that with a 6-year-old or not.
Sure you can.
You can?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Ha everyone in the group. Okay. Moving on, since I'm a killer for the real thing.
No, you won't get killed. I'll get killed.
He'll kill me, you said it. Okay, involve the parents from the standpoint, find out how the student does at home, if this is typical behavior at home, and if it isn't typical, maybe there's a problem between the school and the home for the child. Also, set up some kind of reinforcement schedule, so when the student does X, Y, or Z, he will be reinforced at home also. Another option, and I think this is a very viable thing also, is sit down and talk to the kid to see how he perceives things, what he can possibly do to improve the interaction. Another thing is to chart his diet. There could be a problem with diet. Have the student bring something in from home that has meaning to him, like a show and tell type of thing. So if it has meaning to him, he can share with other people, and that might gain some kind of rapport. And the last type of thing I'm not all that comfortable with for a 6-year-old necessarily, but maybe talk to a guidance person or a school psychologist, whoever in the school sits down and talks to kids about problems of whatever sort.
Is that your last one?
Yeah.
I want to talk to that last one for just a second. And I think that if you have one child like that, chances are you've got more than one. And that sometimes guidance counselors do have the skills to work with children as a group. If you take children with similar kinds of problems and put them down together, and they can sometimes work out very good ways that they can begin to approach their problems. And sometimes this is safer than doing it in front of the whole class or with the whole group, especially if they know that they all share a problem. This is the whole concept, in many cases, of group therapy. And sometimes it's nice to know that I'm not the only one with this problem, that I can get support from other people who have similar problems, and I can learn ways to work on it. I think we really have to come to closure because we have to fill out the process thing. So if you will give us 5 minutes of your time, I will be eternally grateful. Thank you. Yes, I won't see you till next year. Right. Have a nice vacation.